Now we are discussing working of the hard disk. In the computer, hard disk is very much important because the each and every data, whenever we take a word file or whenever we want to see any image file, all the data will be stored in this hard disk. So when we are reading some PDF file in the computer, we are accessing the data from this hard disk. So now we will try to understand the working of this hard disk. We are saying this is an internal storage because the external hard disk generally we observe, like today we are getting like pen drives, we are also getting external hard disks. Previously those external hard disks were only magnetic type, but now we are getting solid state devices also. Here we are discussing the magnetic storage. The internal storage of the computer, we are calling this as a hard disk. So this works on the magnetic storage principle. We are also calling this as a magnetic storage device because the information will be stored in the format of the magnetic flux lines. You all know when we want to store the information of the magnetic field, we need a circular type of the surface. Here the disk will be rotating, and on the rotating disk the magnetic field lines will be coated. So the information will be stored in the form of the magnetic field lines. Like we read about, the inductor is capable of storing the magnetic field lines. Here the information is storing in the form of the magnetic field lines. But CPU, initially when we want to send the data from the CPU to hard disk, or when we want to read the data from the hard disk by using the CPU, we have different operations. Now we are discussing about the disk writing. Means we want to write a data from the CPU to the hard disk. We are taking the data from pen drive example. We are trying to write this data into that internal hard disk. So then CPU says, I have the data. I want to write this data into the particular location. It will send a data write request along with the location. Then there is a hard disk controller. Generally this is a IDE controller. So this hard disk controller checks whether that particular location is free or not. If that particular location is free, then the CPU, whenever it is asking for that particular location, this disk controller says, I am giving the permission to you to access this location for the data write. Then it will put read or write head. So in this case, this is a write head. It is giving access to this particular location. You can write. But now the problem is, CPU is not able to write the data directly into that location. Why? Because the clock speed with which the CPU is operating, because it is a very modern processor. We are taking, it is a i3, i5, i7, i9 we are calling, it is capable of operating with higher speed. But hard disk, it is operating with the lower speed. We want to match the speed. CPU is ready to send the data, but hard disk is not able to take the data with that much speed. Now we are taking an intermediate buffer. We are saying, hey buffer, you take the data. Then the CPU is giving the data, I am giving the data. Buffer, now the data is with the buffer. Now the buffer is asking to the hard disk controller, can I send the data to this particular location? Hard disk controller says, yes, you can proceed. Now this buffer is sending data to that particular location. But still the problem is same, because the information in the CPU is in the form of the electrical signals. You all know computer does not know what is 1 and 0. Computer does not know what is image. Computer does not know what is word file. It only knows the electrical signals. It only knows low voltage and high voltage electric pulses, because all there we are using are transistors. So now this low and high electric pulses we are sending from CPU to the buffer, there is no problem. From buffer to the hard disk, their problem arises. It is expecting the magnetic information, but we are sending the electric information. Now we require an intermediate circuit which can convert this electric signal to the magnetic. So here in this hard disk, we are using one logic circuit which is capable of converting this electric signal information to the magnetic. This magnetic information will be printed on this spinning hard disk, because the spinning hard disk only it is capable of printing that data. So on this spinning hard disk, on that particular location, the data will be printed. The operation is over. But who sent this information? CPU. We have to give an acknowledgement to the CPU. CPU work is done. Then the hard disk, from this, it is, who is controlling this hard disk? Disk controller. Disk controller is saying, okay, data writing is completed. Then it will remove this reader write head and it will send an interrupt to CPU saying that operation, the task you have given to me, completed. This is disk writing. It is very simple. CPU is sending the data to that particular memory location. Whenever it is trying to send to the particular memory location, it is asking permission to the hard disk controller. If the hard disk controller gives clearance, then CPU can directly send. But because of the mismatch of the speeds, it is taking the help of the buffer. It is giving data to the buffer and buffer is sending the data to that particular location. There, the logic circuit is converting this electric signal to the magnetic signal. The magnetic signal will be stored. This is disk writing. Now I want to read the data in a particular location. I want to see some information in the computer, how the reading is happening. When we stored data in a particular location, that is in the form of the magnetic field information, CPU is not capable of reading magnetic field information directly. That magnetic information has to be converted to electric information by this logic circuit. That electric information, when the controller says, yes, the read request is accepted, no other, for this location is not being accessed by any other pen drive or something, so read request is accepted. When the controller says the read request is accepted, when the read head comes, at that time this magnetic converted electrical equivalent information will be passed to the buffer. Why not to CPU, sir? Because of the mismatch of the speed. Then this buffer, it will send the data to the CPU. This is how it will, the disk writing and disk reading will happen. We are trying to visualize this concept. As of now, we have had the theory. We want to visualize this concept practically. So, I have some data. This data might be a MS Word document, or this data might be an image, or this data might be a video. This data I want to store in the internal hard disk of the computer. I have this data. Now, I want to store in the hard disk. But I am not able to access the hard disk directly. I am taking the help of the CPU. I am asking CPU, please copy this data into the hard disk. Then CPU is saying, this data I do not understand. What is this MS Word? What is this video? What is this image? Then I am asking, what data you can understand? I can understand only electrical signal. So I have converted this data into electric signal. This task will also be done in the computer only. So this data is converted into electric signal. This is electric signal. Whatever may be the data, whether it is MS Word document or image or video, now it is electric signal. Now I am saying CPU, data is converted into electric signal. Now copy. Then CPU is saying, see, data is converted into electric signal, but there is a person to control this hard disk. He is hard disk controller. I have to take the permission of this person to copy the data into the hard disk. Then I am requesting CPU, please take the permission. Then CPU saying, okay. CPU is asking permission to the hard disk controller. Hard disk controller is checking whether that particular location is being accessed by any other or not. Because here when we are trying to write the data into that particular location, CPU is sending that coordinate information, that location information. Now that location the hard disk controller is checking, nobody is using, then it is giving okay, you can write. That task it is giving and it is saying read or write bold, so you can write. Now I am saying, now I am happy, now CPU please write the data. CPU is saying stop there, I am running with a speed of Benz car, but that hard disk is running with a speed of cycle. My clock speed is different, that hard disk clock speed is different. How can I directly write the data? No, just now I have got the permission from hard disk controller. You got the permission, but the problem is speed. That person is not capable, that hard disk is not capable of transferring data at my speed. Okay, now I am thinking what I have to do. At that time we got one solution, that is buffer. So this buffer is capable of storing the data at the CPU speed. Now the buffer stored the data. After that, this buffer at the rate of the slow rate of that particular hard disk, it is sending the data to this particular location. But again when we are sending, it has to take the permission of the hard disk controller. Hard disk controller has given the permission, then it can store. But again the problem comes, because this is electric signal, the data here is magnetic. Now I require a logic circuit. I am checking for a logic circuit. Suddenly logic circuit arrived. So this is converting electrical signal to magnetic. It converted to magnetic signal. Now the data is magnetic. This magnetic data, now on this location, it is spinning the location. On this spinning location, the data is printed. After printing this magnetic information, it will remove the write. The controller is removing the write, and it is saying particularly to the CPU, the task is finished. Then the CPU is saying the task is acknowledged, the task is completed. This is a data writing. So once again we are explaining here what is happening in the data writing. First, the CPU wants to send the data. The CPU wants to send the data to this hard disk, but directly it cannot able to send the data to this hard disk. So it is asking to the hard disk controller. It gave the permission. After giving the permission, header, it is bringing the header to it, write header. Now the data, it can send the data, permission is given. At that time, this data with this speed it cannot be copied, so the buffer is coming. Now it is storing the data, and then at the speed of the hard disk it is copying into that particular location. After that, in that location, this electric signal cannot be stored. So logic circuit is coming, and it is converting it is in the hard disk only. It is converting into magnetic signal, and the magnetic signal will be stored on the spinning of the hard disk. This is how data writing will be done. Then finally, the hard disk controller sends the data to the CPU saying that it is an interrupt saying that task is acknowledged, writing is completed. This is how we do the data writing. How data reading will be done. Example, there is a data in the location B. In the location B we have data. Now this data I want to read. That data might be either MS Word document, or that data might be PDF file, or that data might be video, or that data might be image. This data is in the form of the magnetic signal. This data I want to read with the help of the CPU. But CPU can understand only electric signal. So first the logic circuit operation is to convert this magnetic signal to electric signal. This electric signal, because we cannot directly copy to the CPU. Okay. So first hard disk controller has given the permission from CPU to read. This hard disk controller has given the permission for the reading, but still we are not able to read this electric signal because the speed mismatch. Now the buffer, it is sending the data to the buffer after the permission from the hard disk controller. Now from the buffer the data is going to the CPU. At that time only we are reading the data. This is what happening. This time whenever you open the computer, you try to visualize. Whenever you seeing the PDF document, you are reading it. This is how the data reading is happening. Whenever you seeing a video, this is how data reading is happening. Whenever you are writing some information, copying some files, that is how the data writing is happening. This is the process of working of hard disk.